Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Marsh. I'm from the Greater Concord Chamber of Commerce. I'm really excited that you guys can join us for our webinar today. Before we get started, I just want to let you know a few details. If you are a business owner or an employee or someone else in our community who's looking for resources right now, we have a web page where you can find great resources about the COVID crisis. If you go to concordnhchamber.com, from our homepage, there's a COVID-19 webpage, and from there you can access other recorded webinars, tons of links with information, and plenty of resources for you to take a look at. So I encourage you to do that after the event if you're looking for more info. I also want to go over some housekeeping. So if you have a question during today's event, you're going to want to use Zoom's Q&A portal to ask the question. So if you wiggle your mouse or tap your screen, you're going to see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and just tap that. And from there, you can just type in a question. This question can be viewed only by the presenters and me, the host of this webinar. So it is anonymous. We may get a lot of questions, so we'll do our best to try to answer all of them. But you'll want to use that Q&A portal if you have a question. That's how we'll get that info from you. And I also just want to thank Pulsar Security today for partnering with us on this event. They are an amazing company and a really great team, and I'm very excited to introduce Jason and Tim and thank them for joining us today. So I'll let you guys kick things off. Thanks.
Emily, thank you so much. We're excited to be here and really glad to be able to talk about some of the things you can do to secure yourself working from home and highlight some of the dangers out there with kind of the new normal for the near term that we're all dealing with. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, just feel free to raise your hand. We want this to be really informal, and we have some slides that we've prepared, but we'd much rather talk to you guys about what you're seeing, what your questions are, and what you're interested in. So feel free to stop us at any time, and we'll do our best to keep up with them as they come in. A few quick notes about who we are. I'm Jason Nickola. I'm COO and a security consultant here at Pulsar. I have a few certifications such as GX Security Expert and Offensive Security Expert. I teach penetration testing for the SANS Institute. I host a podcast that you should all check out if you're interested in the security field and professional development in that area. I have a couple of kids that are pretty young, so this first picture here on the right is kind of representative of how my quarantine has gone so far. I feel like I just get beat up by my son every day, but we also had our daughter about 5 weeks ago before things really kind of started to lock down. So that was kind of a blessing for her to come right before that. So, but yeah, that's a little bit about me. And we also have Tim Connell. Tim, take it away.
Thanks, Jason, and thank you everybody for joining today. I'm the head of enterprise products here at Pulsar Security. I'm also a security consultant, and my background is roughly 10 years experience in a whole bunch of different roles within early stage startup technology companies in the greater New England, mainly in Boston, but all throughout New England, doing things in sales, marketing, and in product development. I hold a number of different certifications in the security space, penetration testing, as well as understanding just general cybersecurity defenses, as well as networking. And during the day, I play the role of business professional, but at night, I try my best to flex my muscles around cybersecurity, and it usually falls between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. because of the way the world is right now. Or, if I'm lucky, my wife and my two daughters give me an hour of sanity where I can come upstairs and try to get some work done. The picture right there is from Easter. Don't let those smiles fool you. They are actually downstairs screaming as we speak here today. So to kick it off, we thought it makes sense to look at some stats here. In doing so, and before the pandemic hit, as well as as this pandemic is going on, and how hackers are trying to exploit consumers and businesses in a moment where a lot of people are unfortunately very vulnerable. And a lot of this comes down to phishing attacks, not with an F, a PH phishing attack. So it's not a new mechanism, right? So although it's something that seems to be on the uptick now, hackers have had the time to develop the strategies, techniques, and overcome the challenges that can come with carrying out a successful campaign. And as I've said, it's been proven that by playing on people's fears, it's really the best way to have them disregard all the training we put them through and what they know, which is don't click on attachments and don't even click on emails from weird addresses. But a lot of people are acting on impulse because they're at a different mental state than they might have been 6 weeks ago. And with coronavirus, obviously, the impulses have escalated because unfortunately now it's not a matter of, the traditional phishing where it's, my boss messaged me and I got to get back to them. But it's, conversations around, unfortunately, life or death in most cases. People are losing their jobs. People are unfortunately, dying from this. And I'm sure we've all seen on the news, a lot of people are just struggling to pay their next month's rent or mortgage. And of course, things have been done to try to help the people of the U.S. with the $1 trillion CARES Act that was approved a couple of weeks ago. But it's only going out immediately to people who did their taxes and have direct deposits on file. And for those who don't have that access, the government has put together a hodgepodge process through what's called a non-filers process to allow people who don't have their information to the government for them to be able to receive that check. And hackers know this, and they're using that to exploit people as they're most vulnerable. And of course, what better way to do that than through a phishing attack? And creating websites that actually spoof and look like that non-filers form, which we've done here today, and we'll show you in a little bit through that demonstration. And of course, companies, care about their employees, right? I mean, there's a lot going on. They've had to do a lot of things in a short period to make sure that they are functionable to be able to do their day-to-day jobs. But they have their own worries as it pertains to security, to still protect their own networks and to really help or try to keep the lights on while a lot of people are, either on furlough or laid off, or business has been slow because their business is not considered essential by government standards. And as I've said, they've done a great job. Companies have done a great job enabling their employees, but most companies have only had the time to worry about functionality. And security, although it's important, hasn't been the top priority, because if employees aren't able to do their jobs, then there's nothing to actually secure from home, right? So, but every work from home employee now, if you look at it as from a big picture, they're essentially a new satellite office for that company. An employee has to access their at-home network to be able to access the corporate network. So if an employee's at-home network is compromised, then it leaves that company open to being compromised as well. And a lot of home networks, as I'm sure myself I'm a victim of this as well, have notoriously, just bad passwords, outdated software, subpar hardware, and even, bad network devices. And I have to have some weak passwords at home because if they were too complicated, my wife would kill me. So, and most consumers just assume that data they have at their house is not essential data. No one is going to hack them directly because they're just not, quote unquote, important enough to waste their time, or some to waste their time on doing that. And chances are their assumptions are right, but consumers are really just a pawn for the big payday in this situation, and companies need to take notice of this. Because it happens so quickly, it's easy to get a lot of this stuff wrong because the transition was fast. There was no warning. It was everyone is at the office. It's just another day at the office, to a no one go into the office or you could get coronavirus. So companies have been able to accommodate with the quick fixes to enable workers to be able to do their jobs. But this leads to exploitable configurations that in normal standards should never be set for best practices when it comes to cybersecurity. One of the more popular vulnerabilities is when companies expose access over the public internet for an employee to be able to log in and do their job. One of the more famous exploits, I'm sure some of us have heard of this, was called WannaCry. It was launched in 2017. It was made possible by a protocol that was enabled so a user or somebody could access their information over the public internet. And it was set up, and it was international news, right? It spread worldwide. A lot of damage was done, and a lot of corporate data was encrypted because this was a ransomware attack. And for people who are more technical, the protocol was SMB. So, and in Windows XP and Windows 7, which were the prominent operating systems at the time, this was enabled by default. So you would think that it's been 3 years, right? There has been the quote unquote vaccine for WannaCry, so people wouldn't be susceptible to this sort of attack over the public internet again. But that wasn't the case. And today, because Microsoft no longer supports XP and Windows 7 has already been told that it's going to be not supported here in the near future, they're moved on to Windows 10, which a lot of people, if you're not on that yet, please get on it. But 1/3 of all networks today still support Windows XP, and 80% of corporate networks support either Windows 7 or Windows XP. So we actually did a quick search here, and as you can see through the numbers, we basically did a search on this vulnerable protocol. And today, well, I guess it was 3 days ago now, there were still 1.4 million devices that were having this protocol opened to the open over the public internet. And this is a real problem because a lot of people, they don't realize that they could actually be exploited through this mechanism. And as you can see on this here, this tweet on the right, it's still very much a problem as you look at other variations of this protocol. What we're looking at here is there's been a couple of different iterations of this protocol to make it more secure. And the most recent version of that, as of last month, research has shown that that is also vulnerable and can be exploited over the public internet. So the challenge here is that regardless of what you're doing over, or however, how do I phrase this? However you are going to enable employees to connect to the corporate network, make sure that they are not doing that over the public internet. If you want to have some of these different things open on the private network over the local area network, that is fine. But the best way to make sure that you as a company are not susceptible to poor practices at an at-home network that you have no control over, you don't own those devices, you can't mandate them do anything, make sure that all of your access is being done through more secure mechanisms.
So as opposed to connecting a lot of these services to the public internet, what we see broadly, and if you're not familiar with VPN, I'm sure you are now, with everyone working from home, but what we see broadly is that companies implement a VPN solution, and there are a few key benefits to doing that. One of them, which is more consumer facing, is that your traffic is less likely to be sniffed, right? So if there are protocols that aren't encrypting your traffic, then the VPN kind of sits on top of that and encrypts it for you. More relevant to what we're talking about here is you can take some of those services that we're saying you shouldn't expose to the public internet and leave them in the corporate LAN and have your users use a VPN to connect back in so that it's like they are still local on the corporate network, and then they can access some of those resources. That doesn't mean that you don't have to keep those up to date and follow best practices to secure them. It's just that sometimes there are vulnerabilities that come out very quickly, and if you don't have your patching up to date as soon as Microsoft and other vendors release patches, then having these issues exposed to the public internet means that somebody off on the other side of the world in their hacker hidey hole can scan the internet and find vulnerable implementations and exploit you from afar. Whereas, the added layer of VPN connection means that they have to take some additional steps. Some of it we'll show here, but to either compromise a client's endpoint and then pivot into the network that way, or get onto your corporate network in some other manner. Now, just, being a person in the world, the VPNs can be annoying for IT staff to manage, and end users sometimes struggle with how to navigate the networking from their local environment and making sure that it all connects together. And with everyone working from home immediately all at once, that's kind of concentrated at the moment, but it's necessary. It is a more viable and secure solution than saying we're going to expose a lot of this stuff to the public internet. It does have its own issues at times. VPN services can have vulnerabilities just like anything else, can be misconfigured, especially when hastily implemented or expanded to cover, rather than 20% of your employees, it's 100%, right? And these can be concerning because if you can compromise as an attacker a machine that has a VPN connection or get some of those credentials, then you can typically access anything that the user can in the same way that the user would have. So it's not as easy as, malicious traffic with skulls and crossbones and techno music and hoodies and any other, hackery things that I can think of. But, it looks like normal user traffic, and you're using the things that real legitimate users are supposed to use to access the network. So there are some potential worries with it as well. So now, as Tim mentioned, you have to look at these home networks of your employees as kind of satellites or outposts for your corporate assets. You still have to be able to access corporate resources in order to do your job. Sometimes, especially in the more modern world, a lot of times those are in services-based cloud providers rather than things that are hosted in the internal network. But lots of organizations still have file shares and applications and lots of other things that they need to access behind a corporate firewall. So you may see things like phishing attempts where the goal is, I'm going to deliver an exploit to compromise client systems, or I want to trick a user into giving me their credentials so that maybe I can just log in remotely as them. But you never know, when you click a button or when you type your email into a place, you type your password into a place, you don't necessarily know what is happening behind the scenes after you do that. So you really have to take care and use caution when deciding the avenues that you are going to pursue in order to accomplish those things. And we'll cover more of that in a little bit in terms of using trusted resources and trusted vendors and providers and those kinds of things. But you have to build a healthy sense of skepticism about, submitting and saving your credentials and other things into different websites. And it's not just ransomware or capturing login credentials we talked about here. Some of what we'll look at in the demo are things like, what keys are you typing on your keyboard, right? And what's on your screen, and viewing audio and video, which, being a dad at home, I want to protect my corporate resources as well, but I also don't want people, listening to or looking at my kids. So all of that stuff is there as well. Your home wireless network is also a potential avenue. It's less easy to do en masse at scale across everyone on the public internet. But let's say that you work for an organization or an industry or in a project that is very interesting to attackers. And that's actually one of the things that I really enjoy about working in the security field is that we get to pretend that we're attackers often and flex some evil muscles that you can't otherwise legally flex. So when I think of this, I think like, there are people at Microsoft and other companies that have to produce patches for security flaws so that you can install updates. And, if you can get access to one of their home wireless networks, then you don't have to try to figure out after the fact what the patch is fixing. You can see what it's fixing as they're developing some of the code, right? And there are other industries, the list is long of other job roles and projects that someone might be interested in specifically attacking your network. But if they are, then there are lots of resources available for doing some of these things. You can, pull up outside somebody's home or business and capture traffic and try to crack some of the passwords and their devices, such as a Wi-Fi pineapple and actually some other proprietary stuff that we use internally to try to perform some of that stuff. There's even a site, Wiggle, that is like Google Maps kind of, but imagine if Google Maps had the name of your wireless network layered right on top of your house, right? So there's a lot more information out there than people realize. And yeah, you have to consider your home network a vector for attack for the corporate network, because once an attacker is able to do that and get some of your devices in your network, they can again use your legitimate accounts and your legitimate access to applications in order to access the corporate environment. And unless you're doing things like monitoring, geography and behavioral analytics of the time that someone logs on and what they're doing after they log on, it can be much more difficult to detect than script kiddies in another country hitting your web server with scripts to try to see if they can guess a password or something like that. There's a quick question here in the Q&A section, which is, how secure is LogMeIn as a tool for working at home? And what I'm not necessarily going to get into specifics of LogMeIn configuration or vulnerabilities or exploits that they've had. What I will say is that broadly, you want to look at whether or not a resource is over a line or under a line. And what I mean by that is this a well-known vendor that have lots of people using their product, that seems to be fairly responsive when there are issues that are detected? Because we'll get into this when we talk about Zoom in the next slide or two. It's not necessarily that some applications and some vendors have issues and others don't. They all do. It's just about whether or not they're getting the attention and the researching hours to discover some of these things. So it really is, do you trust a vendor? Do they provide you configuration options to do some common sense locking down of your sessions for working remotely? And when things do happen, are they responsive and taking the steps that they need to take in order to secure your environment and secure your activity? And broadly, like, LogMeIn and others, other well-named providers that you would recognize fit that bill. Just that you have to go through some of that process on your own. And if you're determining this for your corporate environment and your workforce as a whole, who do you want to align yourself with? Who do you have a good relationship with? Who do you feel good about? Who do you think is approaching making their products more secure and configurable in the right way? And as long as they're well known and have other people using it, then you're mostly okay. But you got to pay attention too, because stuff comes out all the time, and companies can often change their approach to how well they want to secure their stuff over time as well. So that's kind of a generic answer, but I think it broadly applies to LogMeIn and lots of other vendors.
Do you want me to pull up Wiggle, Jason?
Sure. Yeah. We have we can show you Wiggle quick and just show you what it looks like when you have this map and you have it can almost be so difficult to determine what you're looking at because there's so many networks listed on there. And the way that this works is people literally drive around in different areas and detect what the wireless network names are, and then pump that back up into a database for wiggle.net so that this stuff can be chronicled. There are legitimate reasons to use some of this stuff, and there are illegitimate reasons to use some of this stuff. But, it can feel like, I'm at my house and nobody knows what my wireless network name is, and nobody can figure out enough things about me to guess that my Wi-Fi password is, the name of my dog followed by my favorite baseball team and then the year that I was born, right? But that stuff is actually pretty easy to do and easy to do remotely without having to be within physical proximity.
I saw this, Sprint Corporation.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah, businesses and individuals for sure. So the last question was a good pivot to this topic here, which is video conferencing in general and some of the recent Zoom developments. So Zoom has gotten a lot of attention and a lot of use because people have all of a sudden needed this ability to communicate professionally remotely and communicate personally remotely. And Zoom, has kind of been able to seize the opportunity and get a lot of that share initially, but there were some hiccups along the way. And there were some high profile incidents with people accessing sessions that the organizers did not intend for that person to access, and kind of taking over and sharing things that were that they didn't want in their sessions. Let's just leave it that way. And then there was some research that was released showing that there were some sloppy practices and some insecure practices, and then maybe some misleading practices in terms of privacy policies and what they're doing with data. And that general trend has caused a lot of media outlets and a lot of organizations to say, we're going to move away from Zoom. And I don't personally care about Zoom specifically as a company or as a product. I have no stake in them. I don't use it regularly other than this webinar. But it's more about how do you generally digest these things when they happen, and how do you make sense of it? Because a lot of it is just FUD and fear and uncertainty and doubt for FUD's sake. So what I'd like to do is kind of cut through some of that stuff, right? So it is my opinion, and I don't think that this is an unfounded one, that Zoom, for most of the issues that we've seen, does not have anything that you would not expect from most applications that come under very concentrated and sudden scrutiny from security researchers. Most applications do not go through a very rigorous security testing process. And when they do, the first few phases of that can be tough, can be rough. But it's less about whether or not they have issues and more about, are they taking the issue seriously? Are they trying to make changes to accommodate some of the findings and trying to be better over time? And without being able to give, a full passing grade one way or the other, I would say that at least from what I've seen remotely by following the news about Zoom, they've tried to respond and they've tried to implement things that make their application a little bit more secure and more transparent in terms of what it is doing and isn't doing. Things like Zoom bombing, it gets listed as hacking a lot of times in major news outlets, but it's not really hacking. And what I mean by that is people have started to use Zoom without having a lot of experience with it, without necessarily knowing how to configure it so that only their people can get access to it, and knowing how to kind of boot people from meetings and, to limit the scope of what certain people can do once they're actually in. So a lot of that stuff is really just misconfiguration and a lack of understanding. So it really does require that you take the time to research and learn how to use these products, anything that you use, but especially remote access and remote meeting and remote video conferencing type solutions. And then for Zoom and for lots of other things, there are lots of best practice guides that have been released over the last few weeks, especially that teach you how to configure these things in. And you have to kind of go through that generic process as you roll things out for your workforce. Make sure that you understand what you're using, make sure it's configured appropriately, and kind of have a critical eye for not only the application that you're using, but how some of the reporting around it is being positioned, and try to make sense of, well, is this really a problem with the application, or is it a problem with the people who are using it? And is this vendor responding in a way that makes me feel good about using their product moving forward? Now, with all of that said, very, very recent news over the last day, so if you don't know this, there's a large market for exploits for high profile applications. Windows has them all the time. Lots of other vendors have them all the time. And over the last day, there's been one released for Zoom on the dark web that is supposedly a remote code execution. And what that means is somebody being able to run commands on your machine for the Zoom Windows client. And it's being listed for sale. I think it's listed for $500,000. And that sounds really scary, and it is. There's potentially a legitimate security issue that might allow someone to run commands on your machine. There are mitigating factors. One of them is that you have to be in a Zoom session with an evil person in order to have your machine taken over in that way. The other thing is the story isn't that this exploit is being released for everybody to use and the entire world is, vulnerable to it right now. It's that it's being sold for a pretty high dollar amount, and the likelihood that somebody would pay $500,000 for an exploit and then say, I'm going to target, very, very specific small businesses and try to join their meetings and take over machines is probably pretty low. So the way this typically goes is if this is real, and there's some reason to think that it might be just people trying to drum up fear for Zoom and just cause general kinds of chaos, which if this 2 week and 4 week period is the first foray you've had into internet culture, just trolls. I apologize for you having to learn about trolls by them taking over Zoom. But it's also potential that this is not necessarily a real exploit and people are just trying to troll the world by making them scared about using Zoom. But if it's real, the way it goes is somebody pays for it and then they paid a pretty high dollar value for something, and they're going to be selective in terms of how they deploy it. Because this is what's referred to as a 0 day, in that it has been 0 days since a patch or update has been released to mitigate the issue. But the clock starts ticking on that as soon as it gets used anywhere. So typically it's released pretty selectively. And then, we find a fix for it, and then you have the ability to deploy a fix and not necessarily be vulnerable to it anymore. And we'll cover some more of that stuff around updating your own personal stuff in your own environment here in a little bit. But if I were to summarize all the Zoom stuff, it's not that installing it is gonna, steal your bank account immediately or anything. It's not the most secure application that's ever existed. It's not the most insecure application that's ever existed. It is largely similar to most other products, and Zoom has done an okay job of at least trying to be responsive and quick in terms of how they're willing to try to make some of the things that they're doing more secure. So use it or don't, but whatever you use, make sure that you understand how to use it, configure it appropriately, and get guidance from the vendor and third parties whenever you feel like there is a gap in your understanding of how to use the product securely. So a lot along the lines of what we just talked about with Zoom and what Tim covered at the beginning of this presentation is the event that we're all kind of subject to at the moment has created a lot of fear and a lot of scarcity in certain resources. And for some malicious types, that creates some opportunity. So they know that you're scared about your health, and they know that you're scared about your finances. So they can create phishing sites and phishing emails around trying to take advantage of that. So here on the right, we see COVID-19 stimuluscheck.com is taken as a registered domain. We did have to register a similar domain for the demo that we're going to give you here in a few minutes. But it took us probably, 20 minutes to go through a long list of potential domain names that we could register, find one that was available, and then find one that was available and not $20,000 to register because they've all already been registered. Now, just because they're registered doesn't mean that they're being used for malicious purposes. But that is definitely one of the reasons to register them, right? So I just look at stuff like this and I say, And some of the numbers that Tim covered at the beginning of the presentation show that we're seeing a definite increase in coronavirus and COVID-19 and stimulus related phishing. So they wait for these opportunities because they know that you're scared. And when you're scared, you tend to be a little bit more loose in terms of whether or not you should do things that you know are best practice. There's the other side of it is everybody's working from home, and there are things that people need to work from home, like a webcam. And you try to go to a brand that you might know off the top of your head, like Logitech, and if you can find them, they are many times more expensive than they normally are because they're being price gouged. And without going too deep into the moral implications of that, the reality is that if you don't have one already, then you have to pay lots of money for a well-known brand, or there are lots of these cheap alternatives that are suddenly available. So Tim, if you don't mind, can you pull up just like an Amazon search of webcams? And so these ones are like way at one end of the spectrum. These are kind of crazy. It's a cent and then $10.19 shipping. So I don't think most people wouldn't buy that, but even some of the more expensive ones that are $5, $10, $20, it's like, I look at it and like, yeah, I don't know that any of these are specifically malicious, but I'd be willing to bet that if I had some funding to grab, the cheapest 100 of them, that even if you don't find anything that is purposefully malicious, you are nearly guaranteed to find something that is accidentally malicious, which exposes people who use them to different vulnerabilities or just kind of sloppy practices in terms of how they were coded or constructed or poor hardware, those kinds of things. You can't find a brand on a lot of these things, and they've kind of come out of nowhere. If I were evil, I would absolutely start producing cheap whatever I can and infecting it with malware and then seeing how many people install it. I'm not evil, so instead I'm going to tell you all about it and hope that we can avoid some of those issues. So with these webcams and other devices, you really do have to be careful about maximizing the cost advantage at the expense of your ability to trust the brand, trust the process through which it was built and shipped, and the level to which you feel like, okay, this is probably an okay thing to use. Because unless you have the ability to go in and rip it apart and look at the board and see what's in it, and look at traffic and fuzz some of the inputs and those kinds of things, it's really difficult to know what it actually does when you plug it in. So I would say buy from trusted brands and make sure that there are some default configurations that you can implement to limit the attack surface. And what that means is turning things off that you're not using. And we'll cover a bit more of that in just a few slides here.
All right. Now the moment everybody's been waiting for. Pull it up here. So what we're going to do, as Jason said, is show you a real life scenario of people who are malicious doing things to exploit people's uncertainties in the world and uncertainties on when they're going to be getting their stimulus checks. So let me get it all set up here. And just so you all know, a lot of this you're going to see here is, it's just all manual, but all of this can be scripted, encoded in a way that it runs on a loop where I can just gather this data every 5 seconds, 10 seconds. So I don't really have to sit here at all, but it's possible for me to get the information on a machine in real time. So what we've done, here's the real site. So if anybody hasn't seen this, this is the form that the government has created to get the information for people who don't have either their taxes done or some sort of direct deposit account on file with the IRS. So they created this in what I would call a hodgepodge sort of process to help people get their money as quick as possible. And I'm saying that because if you see this link right here for the URL, this would not be a URL that I would expect the government to use, a .com link for one. Usually you think it would be .gov. And freefilefillableforms.com just doesn't seem like something to help consumers with a $2.2 trillion bailout to help stimulate the economy again. So what we did is we went on GoDaddy and we created a copy of that website with a couple of modifications. As you can see here, it's very standard information. But if you haven't been to this page and they're asking for things that are tax related, it's not unheard of to have them ask such questions like, what is your employer EIN? And how much taxes were withheld over the last year? And things that aren't recognizable, like you don't just have that information in front of you. Unless you are a business owner, you might know your EIN number, but I don't have any idea what any of my employer EIN numbers have been over my career. So with that said, we added a little snippet here where it's, if you don't know that information, just download from Microsoft or Android the ability to register it through your desktop. So I'm going to just click this here. I've already actually have it all set up, but basically you'd save it and then you'd hit run. So basically as a consumer, I would hit run expecting a page to pop up that would allow me to fill in my information to make myself eligible to receive my stimulus check. But what really happened is you've just created, through malware, access for some malicious person to get onto your computer. And that's what you're seeing right here. So there's a couple of things that I have preloaded just to make it easier to get through this and focus more on the what somebody can do and not how they can do it. But things like a keylogger, are the ability to copy a clipboard, your ability to enable or disable a keyboard or a mouse, your ability to take screenshots of the victim machine, which is what you're looking at right here, which is just a standard Windows 10 machine, and the ability to also take over a webcam. I'm not going to do the webcam piece today, but know that it is possible, if your webcam is on, that if you leave your machine on, for somebody to basically have video access to whatever is going on in that room. Very similar to that most recent, I think it was Amazon one of their baby monitors, somebody got access to that and they were talking to the kids a couple of months ago. That same exact general concept. So I'm just going to start, just to show you the ability for the keylogger. I'm just going to type a couple of random things here.
Tim, are you not going to do the webcam because you have sweatpants on?
I put on jeans.
Oh, good.
So, but let me go back over here. And it's not difficult to run this stuff either. So I just wrote, my name is Tim. This is from a couple of older things that I was working on, but hi, my name is Tim is what I just put into that text document. As you can see, I haven't even saved this document. I don't have to. It's just recording all the keystrokes that are done in real time for someone to be able to see what a victim is typing through their keyboard. Some more realistic for what we focused on here today that I'm going to show you is, one is somebody who's actually trying to access their machine at the corporate office over the public internet from their house. So I have the desktop here already created. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to enter my user account information. So I'm going to add a new one. I'll just do tim@timpc.com. And this is going to just be password, just to make it simple. I'm going to save that. Then, you know, a normal user would click this and they would go in and they would access the network and they would do their jobs. But as you can see over here, the same exact process. And if this was running in 5-second loops, you'd have this very quick that, you know, the username is tim@timpc.com and the password is password. So think of it from a hacker's point of view. I just got access to somebody's credentials to log into the corporate network. I can do this without causing a lot of noise for the company that I'm infiltrating into, because I'm logging in through an authorized access point on one login attempt with legitimate credentials. So this is also very difficult to find if you are looking to understand how an incident happened, because nothing here would be very obvious that was out of spectrum to what they would usually see this user do, which is scary because, you know, a lot of things we've been talking about is, you know, good passwords and making sure that, you know, your network is locked down, you know, nothing is exposed over the public internet. Looking at the VPN scenario that Jason was talking about earlier, this could be applied that same exact way. You know, the way to overcome this, of course, is to not click on the phishing email, right? So this goes back to hackers knowing what buttons to push to get people to do things they shouldn't be doing. And that's why it's 90%, 85, 90% of the most common attacks are done through phishing. So let me do another example for you here. So I'm going to go back over to the victim machine. One of the more common things that you'll hear about from cybersecurity professionals and just overall best practices for password management is to get a password manager. So I actually have a fake account on this machine. It's just the trial version. And the only way to actually log in here is if you have the master key token and the master key password. And if you have access to that, you would then have access to any password that I am saving in this password manager. There's other things you could do like two-factor authentication that would make it more secure, but just what people usually do, by having the ability to do a keylogger, I could then get access to all of the passwords that are stored within someone's password manager. So let me just do it real quick here. Oh, wrong password.
Try password all lowercase if it doesn't work.
Yeah, right. So as you see here, this is my password manager. Let me just get it bigger here if it wants to. only have one account. But if I was somebody who was malicious and I was doing things in real time, I would then have the ability to do not copy. This is fake. You know, that is the password that I just typed in. It was actually spelled right the first time. I didn't need to do it twice. But yeah, I mean, it's something that in normal scenarios, if you were to just do some sort of a command that would try every single combination of letter, number, and special character, this password would take lifetimes to crack. You would never crack it. So a normal person would assume that, well, it would take somebody lifetimes to crack this, unless their child, their grandchild inherited this command, they would probably be okay. And at that point, who knows what technology is going to look like? So it's what's even, like I said, what's scary is that this, if you click on things that are phishing, people can get direct access to your machine. It can get all this information in real time, and then they will be able to log in and do things malicious to you as a consumer and potentially to your employer if they aren't taking the proper precautions. Another thing that I have loaded here is I want to go into my Bank of America account. I want to copy this. So Windows has a concept of a clipboard. A clipboard is whenever you copy something, it saves that in your history. So it's very easy for you to go back and open up your clipboard, and if there was a password or something you did, an hour ago, it would still be saved there, so you don't have to worry about remembering either a password, something you did, something you copied. It would all be saved there just for convenience. It would be saved there for functionality and performance, as we discussed earlier, not really caring too much about some of the security precautions of that. So a malicious person could be in here and just type again, and they could have this going on a loop. This is the password. What's scary is that if you look at this, you would expect this password to be as long as every single unique dot here. So if you reveal it, you can see that it's just pass. So I wouldn't even need to have a keylogger in this sense. The password managers, although they try to take the proper precautions, so if you're at a Starbucks or a Panera Bread and somebody's looking over your shoulder, you can conceal your password so they can never actually get direct access to that password. But yeah, I mean, if you have the ability to monitor a clipboard, someone hitting that copy button, you would get that back to your machine. The other thing that you would be able to do is take a screenshot of this. So what's scary about this, and it is the EOZ, so it'd be EOG, is let's say that this was my password manager and I had 75 different passwords. I have, Bank of America, I have Triangle Credit Union, I have Citizens Bank, I have all these different accounts. Most people, even in password managers sometimes surprisingly, will use the same password for multiple accounts. So if I took a screenshot of this as somebody malicious and I just got your Bank of America login information, because I know it's Bank of America, you're going to label it in a way that makes it unique and easy for you to remember what that specific username and password is for. You'd have the security question, because the notes section, I mean, I do it all the time. Some of the different passwords and logins require you to have 3 or 4 different security questions. I can't remember them all. So I write them down in my notes section. You would also have all the other potential passwords and usernames for every other account that this victim had. So you would have Bank of America. I'm going to go try this same tim@tim.com password pass. I'm going to take that to Citizens Triangle. I'm going to take it to their VPN. I'm going to take it to every single account here to see what other areas of their I guess their life, if you will, that I could potentially exploit and get information, whether to steal their money personally, get into their maybe their their spouse's accounts, get into the corporate network, just being able to do a lot of damage. And from a victim's point of view, none of this stuff would be obvious. All of this stuff is just happening under the covers. So you wouldn't even know that this was a problem until it was a problem. The other thing that you can do, I'll just show you this. This is the last one I'll show you, which is more of an annoyance than anything. is, so how many of us, whoops, wrong terminal, it's over here. How many of us use wireless mouses and keyboards? Probably most of us. This happens to me sometimes, and I automatically just assume that it's the batteries. So you come over here, I want to type something new. I just disable the keyboard from the attacker machine. I can't do anything. So as an attacker, if I wanted to basically take a minute on this page to be able to understand what's going on, and I want to see things in real time of what the victim is actually doing, I could freeze their keyboard, take a couple of screenshots, review the data, and then come back over. And I could just enable the keyboard again. So this victim, they just went over to the, the junk drawer in their kitchen. They got the AA batteries. They went over. Great, it works again. It must have been the batteries. Again, not even knowing what is going on behind the scenes. All right, well, since they've already fixed their keyboard, why don't we just go and now we'll just disable their mouse. Huh, wait a second. Takes a second to disable. It should take a second to disable. As we said, Jason, if things didn't go wrong, then it wouldn't be a demo.
Yeah, we're doing it live. We're doing it live.
It worked the last time I did it. Let me try one more time. Huh, weird. Yeah, so basically it's what that should do is disable the mouse. So you'll be able to move it around, but you actually wouldn't be able to click anything. Huh. It didn't read it the first time. That's weird. Try it again, just to humor myself. That's weird. Anyways, so yeah, that would work too in 99% of scenarios. If it wasn't a live demo, it would be working. So you got to give us some kudos that we're at least trying to show you things in real time and not trying to show you something that's scripted. So I'm going to pass it back over to you, Jason, unless there's other things you want to add to just the demo and some of the malicious things somebody can do without a victim actually knowing it's happening to them.
No, I'm going to go actually look throughout my house for cameras that you might have here because somehow I have a junk drawer in my kitchen. So now that Tim has, sufficiently scared everyone by showing some of the things that an attacker can do once they get on your machine, I want to talk about some easy best practice things that you can do to defend against some of what you saw with him, and then just in general, working from home in your home environment, that kind of thing. So this is actually good timing because Corey in chat just asked a question. So does this mean I shouldn't use a password manager? No, absolutely not. I would say that one of the highest value things that you can do is to actually use a password manager. And the reason is because human beings come up with terrible passwords, right? So a password manager allows you to set long random passwords that you don't know for most of your accounts, and it handles authentication and populating that password and all of that stuff so that you don't have to remember my my Google password is I love the Patriots 2019 or why do you leave Tom 12 or something like that. So you really do want to use a password manager. It's very, very high value. There are a few major ones, LastPass, Dashlane, 1Password, but try one, see what works, and then move on to another, but definitely use one. Otherwise you're going to set bad passwords and think that, how is anybody going to figure out my favorite aunt's name, or how is anybody going to figure out my dog's name? They'll figure it out. You've posted about it somewhere, and maybe we do another session at some point about open source intelligence and taking the information that we're all putting out there in the world on the internet and social media, and using that to try to build a profile of someone that we can use to guess passwords and things like that. But just trust that they can do it. When you can't use a password, long passphrases are better than standard passwords. And here's an example. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, even though it doesn't have the upper, lower number symbol complexity that we've come to expect from passwords, is generally a better password than Spring 2020 $. And people tend to use that Spring 2020 $. Password because most organizations require you to change your password regularly. And in order to remember what the password is, they do the year and the season. It's one of the most common passwords we see in an environment. But you want to choose something longer rather than shorter and more complex when you can't use a password manager, which feels counterintuitive to a lot of the guidance that we've received over the last 20, 30 years. That's because it is. The guidance over the last 20, 30 years has been wrong and has been largely updated by organizations like NIST. Go for length whenever you can. Yeah, you also want to turn on multi-factor authentication wherever you can, and that is the functionality that sends you a text message or a push to an app whenever you, or a phone call when you try to log into something, so that somebody sitting again off in their hacker hidey hole on the other side of the world can't just guess your password and log in. There's an additional step that they have to take, and it's not that these are 100% foolproof and the most sophisticated attackers in the world can't compromise them. They can, especially some of the text messaging based stuff. But by and large, the average person, 95+% of the time, is going to be mitigating most of the attacks that are likely to come their way by turning on multi-factor authentication. It stops most phishing-based and account password guessing-based attacks dead in their track for the average person. So if you take anything out of this, it's use a password manager and turn on multi-factor authentication wherever you can. And if you have a vendor or an application that doesn't give you the ability to use two-factor, then it's a good reason to start looking at a competitor if they do. It's that important, right?
Yeah, to add to that, Jason, all the things that I showed you in that demo, as Jason alluded to, multi-factor authentication would have made all that, the exploits there go away. Because yeah, you might have been able to get the passwords, but when you logged in, if you got a text message to your phone, an attacker wouldn't be able to see that.
Yeah, they'd have to compromise an additional device or an additional medium if if you're on your computer and messages are going to your phone or your phone call or something like that. So it does certainly the drive-by stuff, the stuff that you just see happening to everyone on the internet, the phishing emails that are getting sent to millions of people. For the most part, multi-factor is going to stop all of that dead in its tracks. So patching is something that we hear about in the corporate environment very, very often. It's not something that you hear applied to home networks often, but it is equally as important. Even if you're not an IT or security professional, you need some attention here, because we talked about potential Zoom issues and exploits being released and sold and those kinds of things. If a vendor does everything that they're supposed to do and they patch that, but you don't deploy a patch in your instance of that application or on that system or that OS, then it doesn't matter. You're still vulnerable to it. Lots of devices and lots of applications give you the ability to automatically apply patches, and that's going to be pretty safe for most home environments. But there's still some devices, networking equipment, especially like Wi-Fi access points, that don't offer great support for automatic patching. And I'm not going to sit in a bubble in isolation and say, well, you need to become an expert in deploying firmware patches directly to the device, and that's the way you got to do it. And you got to do it because you need to be secure, because I said so. Really, you need to have some trusted resources, whether it's a family friend or ideally a corporate resource that is available to employees to help with this kind of stuff, to take you the rest of the way that you can't go yourself. But it is very, very important because if patches get released and they're not applied, then you still have vulnerable stuff in your environment, and that now more than ever is as a potential beachhead into corporate resources. You want to look at secure configuration, not just patching, but making sure that the configuration of your devices and your systems and applications is where it needs to be to secure you. Lots of devices come with insecure defaults, largely in the form of everything being enabled. When most people don't use all of the functionality of a device, most people don't need remote access to things, and a lot of that stuff comes on by default. So and even if you do have your game together there and you're really limiting the configuration of things, sometimes to troubleshoot, for any of you who have worked in IT support or help desk or those kinds of things, sometimes troubleshooting means turning things off, and they don't always get turned back on. Now, it is full disclosure, it's pretty unreasonable to tell non-IT and security professionals go use hardening guides from NIST or Center for Internet Security or places like that. But if you're interested in taking a crack at it, they have a lot of guidance for common devices and common applications. But again, it's another area where having someone, again, ideally a corporately provided resource that can help you with this stuff in your home network, it's a great use of their time. But a general approach is turn off everything you don't use, so there's a lower attack surface and less for somebody to poke at to compromise your environment. And things like universal plug and play and WPS are high value. Don't worry if you don't know what those mean. It's just insecure defaults that are deployed on a lot of devices. Most home networks don't need anything to come in from the public internet. And again, find someone who can help you with this stuff. Including companies like ours. We're not going to, sell you home security services. That's not really what we're not going to try to make money off you. But if you have questions, then lots of organizations like ours, and hopefully your own, can make resources available for a quick chat and how to do some of this stuff. Again, we covered this a bit before, but stick to trusted sites, vendors. You don't need work from home tips from some random company that emailed you. These places, major news, media, government, they have their own issues, but in general, they're not trying to hack you. So if you get something from CNN or Fox News or the CDC or places like that, then you're pretty safe for the most part. The $10 webcam probably isn't worth the cost savings. And I get that funds are tight for businesses and for individuals at the moment. So if you're doing expense policies, just try to keep that in mind, that limiting these things to the cheapest possible option. A lot of times, even if it's not malicious, it's going to expose you to things that just weren't built as well, and they definitely are not going to fix when issues are found. The IRS is not emailing you to threaten jail time, and there is no vaccine from a Facebook group that's going to help protect you. Just you need to have a little bit more skepticism with some of the sources for products, especially with the scarcity that we're seeing now, and some of the sources of information, especially those that come to you that you didn't ask for. We need to have a healthy sense of skepticism about those things and not click on things from places that we don't trust. And this, there are lots of things that I hope come from this unfortunate situation that we're in. And one of the things that I really hope does come from it is that organizations take more of not ownership, but more responsibility for how their employees do things away from the office, especially as it relates to connecting to corporate environments. If you're not looking at what's happening with your work from home employees and you're not doing what you can to help them, it doesn't make you more secure. It just means that you don't know the ways in which you're really not secure. And resources can be scarce, and IT and security staffs are already stretched thin. But the more the average organization can do to help their employees configure and patch and follow best practices, and certainly educate about phishing and secure practices at home and in the corporate environment, it is going to just do wonders to help remove the bottom maybe 25% of things that we're seeing out there in the world, and hopefully make a bit of a difference. So I'd love to see more organizations support their employees in that way. So that's the end of the presentation. I hope that you all got something out of this and learned at least a little bit in terms of some of the attacks that we're seeing and best practices for protecting yourselves against those things. I really appreciate the opportunity from the Concord Chamber and to all of you for attending. If there's anything that we can ever do for you, we're a pretty easygoing, laid-back company. We want to help people, especially those in our immediate region. And to that end, we do have a training giveaway that we're doing. So if you find us on LinkedIn and find the post where we're giving away some training, just comment your name. We're not looking to sell you anything. We don't need your email. You're not going to get on a list anywhere. We just know that a lot of people are losing their jobs and being laid off and are going to have a difficult time potentially becoming gainfully employed in the future. So one of the things that you can do is get some training and build up your skills to try to put your best foot forward. And we really do want to help with that. So find us, ask any questions, and we're here to help for whatever we can do. So thanks to all of you for attending.
Just want to thank you guys again for the great presentation. I was wowed by your demo, and I want to let you all know who are viewing today that I will be emailing a recorded version of this webinar, as well as the PowerPoint presentation for you to review later. So keep your eye out for that email from me. Thank you for joining us.